Good morning and welcome to Echelon Orchid episode 35. I am your host, Dr. Dan Ford, and joining me as always for Sunday morning coffee, my co-host, TK Eppley. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
How are you on this fine Sunday morning?
I'm doing well. How's everything in Indiana?
Well, we're not locked down like a lot of these other parts of the country. At least not yet.
We're not in lockdown, but we're not roaming around free.
Yeah, I definitely don't think there's a whole lot of freedom in a lot of the states here. I posted something on Twitter the other day where, as people were talking more and more about this, I said, at a certain point, when those that have been entrusted with governing have suppressed the governed to a point to where they are unable to defend and support themselves and their families, at what point of the social contract do you not believe has been broken? Because a part of any social contract also happens to have the natural law. And part of the natural law is that we are able to supply and defend and put food on the table for ourselves and our families. So at what point are people going to realize the social contract's kind of being broken here?
Well, no, I totally agree. And I think we've talked about, I don't know whether we've talked about this on air or not, but my concern now is it was 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Then it was 2 months, and it drags on, right? And I'm not talking about wackos, right? I'm talking about differing points of view on science. Right, Center for Pediatric Medicine says, "Hey, ages 5 to 7, there's almost no chance," and people get discounted, right? And like most things today, it's a battle for your soul, right? You either have to be all in on one way or all in on the other, and the average, middle of the road Americans, they're like, it's fatigue, right? And at what point do you just stop listening? Right. And it becomes white noise. And that's the dangerous thing. Right. Because if you latch onto something so long that people, they just don't want to hear it. They don't care anymore. That when there's actually something that's going to be really important in the future, people are, oh, this is just like the pandemic of 2020. I'm not falling for this again. Right. Yeah. And you have people not taking real steps. Right. And so what's the fatigue factor on that? Right. And there's enough blame to go around everywhere at every level of government, right? But when people start questioning the legitimacy of elected leaders, and that's really what's happening, right? In a lot of states, in both ways, right? In the states where you have primarily governors are saying, hey, let's open the state, let's do everything. You have a certain faction that says, oh my God, they're trying to kill everybody. And then on the other side of the coin, you have like, hey, you're taking away my rights. Right.
And speaking of that, I guess you happen to mention this is probably the word elected official. Won't be able to support and promote this show today.
Right.
Thank you, Google and YouTube, because of your stupid policy on, even though they said it right, the thing, while we are fully, acknowledge that your show is about awareness and general knowledge, we cannot provide any exception to our sensitive policy, our sensitive events policy. I'm going, what do you mean? We're literally just talking about general knowledge, not in support of any official in any way. But the thing is, we talked about it a little bit last week. Wear the mask. Why? Because that local small business owner needs to also pay for their family. That flight attendant needs their job. And if the airline travels can't do it, then they're not going to have a job. And I think there's, I don't know why there's not more talk about this. With the amount of money that's going out there, how come the states aren't just, providing, I don't know, some type of tax relief or grant or something like that to restaurants and bars to upgrade their ventilation?
Right. I tell you, like I said, the gym I go to, when during the first period we closed down in March, April till about June, that's all they did. They went in and they completely revamped their filtration system, and they're moving a lot more air out. I mean, they're awesome. They're completely invested in 24-hour cycle of cleaning, and more importantly, and I think this is, to me, this is the important part. When you look at any group of people that are, become part of a tribe of some sort, right, become part of a community, everybody in that facility, we all have the same intent. The intent is to stay healthy through working out and keep the facility clean and do our part to mitigate, right? And so you don't see, there's no instance where you got to go tell somebody to wipe something down. Everybody's really proactive, and the facility has everything out there to make it easy for you to do the right thing. I think that, in my mind, is kind of a model for, hey, what are we doing in America, right? Well, no, the easy thing to do is say, we're going to shut everything down and put our heads in the sand and hope for the best. Like, at some point, you take something that literally has a minuscule death rate, right? And you say, hey, we're going to paralyze the world, right? And we get myopic about the U.S., but varying degrees around the planet. We're going to paralyze the world, right? When, for example, the governor of Virginia has the authority to quarantine people. He has, and that's where he stops, and that's what is used to do what he does largely in the state, or in the Commonwealth, as we say. If you read the statute, what he really has the authority to do is to quarantine sick people and keep them away from healthy people. All right? That's a different animal. And those nuances are what allows people, in a lot of people's minds, right? Because you hear a lot of, some people are like, hey, if you don't do this, you're completely insensitive to other people. And on the other end, if you do it, you're basically taking away my rights. All right. Well, if you're part of a at-risk group, you own taking care of you. Hey, if for example, if my father was still alive with emphysema and everything like that, you guarantee I'd be going over there in everything but a hazmat suit, right? Because he's part of an at-risk group, and I don't want to potentially introduce what could kill him if he were still around. Having said that, if you largely are part of a group of people that they work out, they have no underlying health things, they're properly fed and properly supplemented, your chances are drastically reduced to the point where, I'm not telling you go take your mask off and go mouth kiss your cashier, but go live your life, right? And at what point as Americans, right, or as global citizens, right, depending on how far you want to extrapolate this out, do we not have control of our own lives anymore, right? And that's what's starting to really freak people out, to the point where where's the civil unrest? Right. And that's the thing that bothers me. Like, at some point, people are going to say, I've had enough. Right. And that's the danger part. Right. So how far can you push that? And do I think that in dark places, there are certain politicians that are trying to figure that out? Yes. Right. And it's not party agnostic or anything like that. It is party agnostic. Right. Because, people want to see how far they can push it, and that old thing of, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely, is how do we deal with that, right? Because a person is sane and rational. People in groups are not. And nobody knows that more than law enforcement, right? You talk to one individual and you can calm everything down. You get groups of people involved, pushing, shoving, spitting, doing everything that we do today. And then things ramp up, and then bad stuff happens, right? At what point does that spill over where it's citizen against citizen, right? And that's the thing that worries me, because of the fatigue from 8 months now of dealing with different levels of not being free to travel, right? Just, hey, I want to go here. Oh no, well then if you go here, you're supposed to quarantine for 14 days. Here's the thing. Why is it different? Right? If it's that big a deal, why is it different?
Well, I think it's different, one, because each state looks at things a little bit differently.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, but two, that it's not settled science in all aspects, right? So let's take a look at, I don't know if you caught Joe Rogan's last show with it was earlier in the week with Nicholas Christakis. He's a doctor from Yale, and he's talking a lot about, small little school there in Connecticut, right? And he talks about here's why masks are slightly effective, because it's not the virus itself, because the virus itself is, yes, it's so tiny, but it has to attach to things most of the time. And
Right.
because it has to attach, that attachment becomes larger, and that's why they can do it. And some masks are more effective than others. And then when it gets to aerosol, the best way to do it, like if you want to, take a look at he used the hose example. The closer I put something to that hose in terms of the mouth of the water, then I'm more effective at keeping some of the stuff away. But the thing that really got me was when he said the data for all of these vaccines are not being released.
Right.
We don't know, what, if it's safe, because we truly don't know. That people can say it. They'll say it's 90, just under 95% efficacy, but we don't know how many people were exposed.
Well, there's no peer review.
Right. How many people
I should say limited peer review.
Right. How many people were exposed? And then the funniest thing that he said, I wouldn't even say not funny, haha, is he goes, what we don't know is, will this reduce any of the mortality? What it's very likely this will do is take it for the people who would have normally gotten severe symptoms, will go down to mild, but very well may not change one bit of the death rate for people that are exposed to COVID. And we won't know that for a very long time. And it's like that with most vaccines. You really don't know what it's going to do. And he did kind of, allude to being concerned as to how fast this is moving through the process, which concerns me greatly. I have no problem taking vaccines. I believe in science. I want it to be good science, because they've said there has never been a successful vaccine in humans for any coronavirus.
Well, but it's not a successful vaccine for flu either. It reduces your chance to get, and that's, I think if they come out and say, hey, what we're trying to do is akin to what goes on with a flu vaccine, is we are trying to introduce it in to create antibodies so that we lessen the effects, so we can all move around. That's fine. But to say it's a panacea is what should alarm people.
Do you think flu vaccines are effective?
They're not for me, and I don't take it. But I'm going to say, I think they used to be, right, and I think they're trying to keep up. But as just like anything else, things morph themselves and everything changes. So how can we, at some point, what do we become strain resistant to, and then what do we have to deal with, right? I mean, but how have we handled the flu for years, right? We've in the wintertime, or in the flu season, as it were, however you want to call that, people that feel they're at risk or that are compromised from from immunocompromisation or things like that, they segregate themselves. They don't go out and do everything they normally would, right? And that's typically, that's exercising some personal responsibility, and I think, on the other side of it is, hey, if you're sick, stay at home, right? And that's, I think when we go back to Corona, I think that a lot of people are wearing themselves out, that, they're over it and they're like, I don't care what's going on, I'm going to go do this, right? And I mean, you look at, some of it now with how the reaction to it is theater. One of the schools around here, the basketball team effectively they're in a lockdown situation. They all live in the same dorm. They're doing everything they can do to ensure they can have a basketball season by keeping them semi-segregated and all that other stuff, right? Well, they went off campus and had a party at somebody's house. It was all the same group of people, basically, right? And the school went and expelled all those students, right? It's like, hey, let's, there's 0, there's 100, right? We don't have to jump from one to the other in thing, because this is an issue, but we're going up in cases, not percentages of deaths, right? And is it are we going up with people that have antibodies? Does it activate? I mean, again, we talk about what's being put out. It's not detailed what's being put out every day. And yes, you can go look it up and do your research and like that. But the way that you keep people on the reservation is to have transparency in what you're doing. And I think the problem now is a lot of people don't think there's transparency, right? And they're hoping people just don't spend the time to go look everything up.
Well, there isn't. I would agree. There's not a whole lot of transparency.
That's what I mean. There isn't. But you have to go look everything up, right? And we have a society that values, hey, I'm going to watch something, I'm going to listen to somebody talk, and then I'm going to take that and I'm going to run away with it, rather than spending time dorking around the internet to try to find out what the real deal is.
Yeah, because a lot of people will start putting out some really silly things, and this is just where, like, whole reason why people believe that the Earth is flat. QAnon, all of these kind of things, and then this is why we wind up having the silliness of all of a sudden now Twitter, Facebook, Google, you name it, have to start, well, I say have to, while they started censoring things because of the amount of false information, rather than, it's okay for experts to disagree. That's right. Why you have research.
Yeah.
You have to have disagreement. Well, let these, just because, Dr. Fauci happens to be in a government position, it doesn't actually make him the lead, the most important epidemiologist, or however you say it, in the country. It just means he has a government position.
Well, and I also think I heard this the other day. I was at the gym, and you just hear people talking, right? And this whole concept of how people are consuming what they hear about coronavirus, especially because everybody, whatever they hear, right, goes through a filter of what they believe, right? What they want for an outcome, right? If you are, hey, let's be compassionate, let's lock everybody up until this thing is gone and we'll all live to tell another day. Or if you're like, hey, I'm going to be responsible and I want my personal freedom, I don't want to wear a mask, the prism that information comes through is different, so you're going to hear different things, right? Because you want to hear different things. And and I don't disagree with this sentiment. Every doctor, because once they allow, every doctor that gets on and talks about this in the public space, what's your relationship with the pharma industry? And do you stand to benefit from one position or another? Right? I think that's fair. Right? Because there's a difference. And I again, this was a doctor, frontline doctor who's, every day seeing patients, right? And his thing was like, hey, there's a difference in being a medical doctor and what I do and being a research epidemiologist. All right. He goes, I see it on the ground. I know what goes on every day of the week. He goes, and we're not arguing over how this thing works or anything like that. We understand we understand the medicine and the physiology behind it. And he's like, I'm tired of getting shouted down by the epidemiology world when I say, hey, this is what we can do, and this is the tolerance that we have built in. They've never done my job, and so how can they come out and tell me what to do? And that's just, again, is everything that I start to look at and go, it's kind of dangerous, is when sensible people get frustrated to the point where they're like, this is BS, I'm not doing this anymore. Right? And these doctors that are out there on the front lines fighting it, they took the epidemiologists seriously and got fully geared up and everything in March, June. Now they're like, hey, let's do what we're going to do and keep this thing moving. Right? And I went to the doctor the other day. They call you the day before, hey, have you been sick? Have you been around anybody that's been sick? Have you had a COVID test? Have you done, yes, no, whatever it is. And then it's up to you not to go pollute the planet. Right? And I think that's, again, we've been talking about the Constitution, and you have rights and you have responsibilities. Right? We have the right to move freely about the country and not be questioned as to our whereabouts, as long as we're not breaking the law. Right? But we also have we have the right to move freely about the country without people questioning our whereabouts and why we're traveling or doing what we're doing. We have the responsibility to not be breaking the law while we're doing it. Right? And that right now, people want to skew that. right? And say, well, the governor said this, so you have to do this. Nah, he's asking, right? Or she's asking, right? But when you have again, and I think it was in Oregon, the governor's like, hey, it's either going to be $1,000 fine or 90 days in jail if you have more than X amount of people in your house. Here's the problem with that. I think there's a problem with that to begin with. But even if you don't agree that there's a problem with that, here's the problem with that. Sheriffs and police are like, we're not going to enforce that. We're not turning otherwise law-abiding citizens into criminals. And that's a quote.
Yep. And the New York sheriff said that as well.
Right.
Yeah.
California, everybody but LA, I think, in San Francisco, all those, county sheriffs and stuff like that were like, we got drug problems. We've got, kids being abducted. We've got all these really important things. I'm not going to worry if there's 7 people in somebody's house.
Right.
Right.
So going back to the flu vaccine effectiveness, it's not even 50%. Right. So the CDC, I posted it up here in the show. Last season's, the 2018-19 flu season was overall, the vaccine effectiveness was 29%. In 2014, it was 19%.
That year that it was 29%, though, didn't they construct that flu shot against a strain that didn't actually end up being the predominant strain that year?
Possibly.
Right? I might have read that somewhere. I could be wrong, folks. But I think that's, if it wasn't that year, there's something to that where, hey, we assume it's going to be this strain, so they make the vaccine or they make the shot to fix that, and it ended up being a strain that was different enough that reduced its effectiveness. I think I remember reading that somewhere.
Yeah. Now in 2004, it was 10%.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm not saying that it doesn't work.
More people got sick from having the flu shot than actually got. You're
right. Now here's the thing. And here's the thing. And I don't want people to misconstrue this. Because if you ask, as far as I know, every medical doctor I've ever asked, they say, get your flu shot. Why? Because it's generally considered safe.
Right. And
because of that, even if it's only improves your odds by 20% of not getting it, that's good enough because it didn't cost a whole lot of money.
No.
And it's safe. So
largely why they give them out for free. You go to the grocery store, go to the pharmacy section, they'll give you
right?
It's sensible business.
Right. Right. So
you've got decades of the efficacy of that.
Yes. Right.
Not hours.
Right. We've got a history. We know what goes into it. All these kind of things. Same reason why I'm not against, my kids when they were young getting the MMR shot, the measles, mumps, rubella. It's considered safe.
Right.
We've got enough history of it to know, the probability of this having a bad reaction is minuscule. Could it still happen? Sure, but it's
like when you look at the anti-vaxxers, right? And they stopped giving their kids the polio vaccine, and then we've got a big surge of polio coming back. It's like, dude, like we cracked the code on this one 80 years ago. Like, we can stop. Like,
right.
It's why the patent was given away for free. It's why it was put in the public domain, right? Because it was for the public good.
Right.
Right. And we fixed that. Like, why do we, in a lot of Euro countries now, like they're having a reinvigoration of polio in particular, but all of that, right? Hey, none of these things came along last week, right? This virus came along. This vaccine came along last week, right? And when you're not allowed to question the efficacy of that again puts, it's the you first mentality, right? Where okay, you take it. Right. When you're talking about doctors, right? And that's fine. I want to watch you take it. Right. I want a video of you having taken it yourself. It's the same thing like investors, right? You go to your investment guy, and the first question I always ask my investment guy is, I want to see what you're investing in. After he tells me what he's going to put me in, I want to see what you're investing in. And if it's not the same, I'm getting up and I'm walking out.
Right.
Like, why? Wait a second. Why can't I put my stuff in the stuff you're putting your money into?
Well, there is a caveat to that. What's your risk tolerance versus their risk tolerance?
Well, but but what I'm saying is largely if you're putting it in index funds, like, which is, most of where that goes, you're putting in index funds, you're picking, my research is probably not going to have been as good as yours because you do this every day of the week. I'm showing up because I don't do it every day of the week. Well,
right. But that's kind of the important aspect to all this, right? You need to know what questions to ask in the event that things differ.
Yeah.
And if someone were to say, well, why aren't you, are you getting the vaccine? No. Well, then why should I? Well, you're high risk. And so you're 70 plus years old, you have this, and this. So if in the event that, you don't take it and you get COVID, you have a much higher probability.
Yeah, it's more of a death sentence for you than it is for other folks, right?
Right. And that's the part that I think the population needs to understand. What questions should you ask on should you or should you not get a vaccine at an early stage?
But do you follow Death Star on Twitter?
Not really, no.
Okay. So I'm very proud of him because he's lost a metric ton of weight. He still has a long way to go, right? But he's always been very open about how he got to the weight that he was at, right?
Well, right, sure.
He's, he's like, hey, I'm not blaming anybody else. It's my responsibility. I was 500-600 pounds, right? But he's lost a whole
human.
He was
definitely over 600 pounds.
What's that?
I know he was definitely over 600 pounds.
Well, but he's lost a whole human now. He's down.
Yeah.
He's trending in the right direction. But his thing is, he is basically a death toll meter for how many people died of this thing, and he's imploring people to stay away. Well, look, you're a very high risk individual, right? I get it. But again, he's out, he's wearing a mask, he's walking around, he's getting his exercise, he's doing all the things he needs to do. But you can't transfer that emotion onto somebody else, right? Psychologically, it doesn't work, right? And is it the empathetic position to say that I've got to go defend everybody on the planet against themselves? Right?
No, I would say
that comes to taking vaccines or whatever, right?
Yeah.
If what you're doing is going to compromise the rest of the planet, okay, but we don't know that, right? Just in the same way that we didn't make a big deal about H1N1, and it could have a catastrophic effect, or SARS, or whatever it was, or even the annual flu, right? When you get on an airplane in the wintertime and it's flu season, God knows who's getting on that airplane. We don't ask questions. We don't do anything.
Well, when I used to travel all the time, when we were at Silent Circle, and even prior to that, Fixmo, McAfee, all this stuff, during flu season, I always wore a mask on a plane. Always.
Good. I have a hyperactive autoimmune system, so I traditionally don't get sick. I'm very lucky in that way. It manifests itself in some other crazy ways. But I would never look down or make fun of anybody that says, hey, I'm going to wear a mask. Right? Because one of the two things, either your body and you're in an immunocompromised position and you're trying to help yourself, or, hey, I'm not sure, I may not be at my peak health right now, and I don't want to take the opportunity to infect anybody else.
But there's also an aspect of, if they believe it works, that's the reason why, right? It likely does work for them, because our mood, all of these things affect our immune system.
Well, it's the other thing. Whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you're usually right both ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And this is one of those, like I said, I've stopped looking at it as a public health crisis as much as now we're going to enter a phase where people are just going to stop listening, right? It's white noise. Hey, earthquake's coming, whatever. You guys we're not going to trust you to do that.
Right. Well, and I think this is the point you were hitting on earlier. When people say, "Oh, the Civil War is coming," I do kind of feel that way, but I think it's groups of people against groups of people, not the people against the government, right? I almost feel like the government is they're sitting back and watching, and almost not even really playing referee, but hey, let's see what happens between Proud Boys versus Antifa when there's something, and let's just stand back. Right
now, they are picking sides, right? Because if you look at some of the things Antifa and some of the other groups have been out there, any group that's out there, but you're allowing them to roam with impunity. They don't arrest them. They're vandalizing, looting businesses, and that's, that whatever the Freedom March was up in DC, you hadn't heard from Antifa since the election. And then that day they got to come out, and here's the thing: have a differing opinion. Be violently stood in your opinion and shout it at the top of your lungs. But there was a guy on a scooter, probably 65, 70 years old. He had a Trump T-shirt on. That's not a reason to beat somebody half to death. right? I don't care whether you like Trump or not. I don't like, the whole thing, it's just, there's no humanity in that. Right. And that's the thing that bothers me is like, hey, I'm not asking you to pick sides, but when a felony is in progress, let's take a look at it. Right. Let's don't condone the behavior. And I feel, well, they're not condoning it. Yes, you are, because you're not arresting folks. Right. You're allowing people, you're allowing people to hit people in the heads with bricks because they don't agree with their opinion. All right. That's in anything. Right. You know, it's like, hey, and you've heard me say this before. I want whatever you have to say, I want you to be able to say it at the top of your lungs. I'll give you the damn microphone. Because if it sticks, the world will be greater.
And defend your right to have that microphone.
Right.
Even if I disagree with
what you're saying is abhorrent, I want you to be out there every day saying it, because the quicker and more rapidly you're out there running your mouth about something that's completely abhorrent, the quicker we're going to find out we need to push that out of society. Right. And that's how this whole free speech thing is supposed to work. Right. It's why, like, people are like, oh, we got to get rid of the Klan. I agree. But we haven't done it in over 100 years. Why? Because we try to push it into the background all the time. Right. Let that guy or girl have a microphone every day of the week, because we're going to go, you know, as much as everybody intrinsically knows what they are is completely abhorrent and wrong, get it out there where, you know, hey, go, you've had your time, beat it. And everybody agrees with it, because eventually people are going to go, hey, no, we can't be that way. Right? On anything. And be completely honest about where people are getting their money from. Because I think at some point you have some really good movements get co-opted by things that aren't so good. And what you do is you say, hey, we're going to kill the messenger, and we've co-opted the message. Right? And again, get out there, free speech, right? But if you start rioting and looting because you're not getting your way, you lost me. I don't care who you are. You lost me, right? We're not at that point of, you know, where we're burning down the country, right? I mean, morally, thought-wise. If that's what you want to do, let's get a handle on that and stop that, right? But until then, shout as loud as you want in either direction. And if I disagree with you, I have to stand there and take it. And I have to come up with a better argument, right? That's the hard part is, you know, don't get loud or get a better argument. And if we're not going to do that, then we degrade into what we degrade into.
Absolutely. It's an interesting time for sure. And I think a lot of our folks, which is why we were doing this Constitution series, is to understand a little bit more about their rights. Because one, I just don't feel like they're being taught very much so in school anymore. You know, whether or not it be the First Amendment, the Second, Third, Fourth, or the Fifth, or you name it, they all have a significant amount of importance as to why we're doing things. I mean, this is our social contract. And as I stated earlier, I think the social contract is being broken. We're allowing it to be broken. We're allowing the government to essentially tell us what you can and can't do when you are, by all medical accounts, healthy.
Right.
If you're sick, yeah, you should stay home. And I'll tell you something that at least that New York has done right when it comes to something along these lines. They've now made it mandatory for every company that if a person is eligible for benefits, they have to by law have 56 hours of sick time. You have to grant them 56 hours of sick time, and it's there.
Okay.
Because before it wasn't. It was, there was nothing to state that
policy.
Right. So I like that they're going, okay, you're this way. If you're sick, you're still going to be able to stay home and get paid.
Right.
So I think that's the way in which we encourage people when they are sick to stay home.
Right.
It wouldn't matter to me if it's the flu, the cold, you name it. COVID. If you're sick, stay home.
Right.
And if you don't,
I think there's a combination of it. One of the companies I worked at, the day you showed up, you built up to 30 days a year, and you could use it however you want. It could be vacation, sick time, whatever you wanted. So if you're saying the average American gets 2 weeks a year, that's giving them another week and a half. You're bumping into that type of zone. The other thing they did was they paid for long and short-term disability. And so that if you got sick for a protracted period of time, that covered the delta so that you would still be getting a full paycheck, right? The whole time. And lastly, we had a few folks that, because they had folks that went overseas and deployed with military units that had gotten hurt. And we had this robust program of donating, right? It became a community thing. Oh, somebody got hurt working, and so they're out of this, they're out of that. People would donate their PHO. You know, I'll donate 24 hours. I'll donate, thing. And it became a community thing. And, again, it was a great CEO, great leadership group who took every resource that they could apply to it and said, is absolute profit my motivator? Nope. Hey, they sold for a big number. When they sold, they did a great job, but they took care of their people. I think you look at a lot of smaller companies now that kind of, as ACA took hold, hey, what are we spending our money on and what are we getting for our money? And, that's one of the things we had to deal with when I was at Silent Circle, is that transition from pre to post ACA. And how do you get the most for your folks for the least amount of money? And what is our contribution as opposed to the employee contribution? You're looking at a lot of the smaller companies now, they're flat out just giving 100% platinum plan for you and your family. That's zero out-of-pocket cost no matter what. Right. And if you balance that out with, because I had one of the folks we know, they were going to work for one of these companies, and like, well, the salary's not this. I go, yeah, but you have zero out-of-pocket expense for healthcare, as opposed to what you had last time. I don't know what that number is for you, but you're probably adding somewhere between $20,000 and $40,000 to your bottom line every year, just by not having to lay that money out, right? And I think people are now, like employers are now getting creative, especially in businesses where your employees are not a commodity, right? Service industry, right? Where an employee's a commodity. If somebody doesn't want to show up and pour a beer, serve a table, do whatever, don't forget it. You're out. Let's go get somebody else, right? It's a very cold-oriented business, right? But if you're saying, hey, I'm bringing in development talent, and this, and I want to grow and keep these groups of people, and you have the resources. A lot of companies now are doing it on not just kind of the reactive thing of giving you great health insurance. They're doing it on the proactive stuff. Like you're allowed to go get massage. They're paying for gym memberships. They're doing all these things that are largely considered to be widely beneficial for health, right? And how do you make that scale, right? I think that's when you look at it, and when you think about healthcare in the U.S., it's 50 individual companies, all right, in each state. So Anthem or Blue Cross Blue Shield has 50 individual companies that are mandated in large measure by state law, right? And through Medicare, Medicaid, and some other federal programs, we're trying to overlay an ACA. You're trying to overlay federal mandates, for lack of a better word, on the state governments, right? And I think that's where things get a little hazy and dark, right? But you're right. People have a desire to show up and work, and let me put it this way: people have a desire to show up and get their bills paid, right? And right, just because you're sick doesn't mean it shouldn't be a catastrophic end, right? I mean, you look at the after World War II in the 50s and 60s, that was a big driver for employers, right? And it let us off the hook for having a conversation about healthcare in the U.S. for the longest time, right? Because costs were relatively low, and anybody, and the American dream was to work for a big company or to work for a company for the totality of your employment and retire with a gold watch and everything in 25, 35 years, right? It's how the General Electrics, IBMs of the world, and everybody, they made it because they had long-term employees, and it was a cradle to grave. That's not the way people look at it now, right? And somebody that's 30 now or getting out of college, they say you're going to change jobs probably 11 times, change companies, in a 40, 50-year career, right? That's completely antithetical to certainly my dad, right? Who stayed at General Electric from the day he got out of college to the day he retired, right? And he was groomed, grown, and everything to keep moving up within the organization, right? And then in retirement was largely, had a defined retirement and understood what that was, and bought by the metrics of it. Now you see that a lot, even as companies trade hands, now a lot of that's the first place they go is overfunded pension plans and things like that, and chip away at what people that really can't defend themselves anymore, right? They're retirees. They're an expense. They're not part of the profit, and you start ignoring that. And that's where, then all of a sudden, that's where you get federal oversight. And I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm just saying that's where you get federal oversight and people wanting to do things that are drastic.
Yeah, and speaking of drastic, maybe we'll get to a few minutes into our Constitution series of the Fifth Amendment today. To me, when we get into the Fifth Amendment, this speaks very loudly when you had talked about, on earlier shows with everything in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution was basically a big FU to England. And I really think the Fifth Amendment, really is about that, because, the England had these things called, basically they were like inquisitors, and you were up on the stand and they would just constantly berate you until you essentially, either confessed to the crime and it was true, or you confessed to the crime and it wasn't true. There was no way for them to get off the stand. That aspect of self-incrimination, that you do not have to be a testimony against yourself, aspect of the Fifth Amendment. So when we hear all this stuff about I plead the Fifth, well, you're basically saying I'm not going to say anything, which is smart because you're not a lawyer, and we may be really, really, really intelligent, but lawyers get paid. Even those prosecutors, they get paid to twist words around and box you in a hole. So don't say anything. Don't get up on the stand.
It's like Ron White when he got the comedian Ron White. When he got arrested, he said, "I had the right to remain silent. I did not, however, have the ability." Yeah. Right. That's yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot about the Fifth that I think a lot of people just don't quite understand, and I'll post it up here. Mainly because it's one of the longer ones. Like rather than the Third Amendment was pretty short, right? It just had couple words.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Of course, it's so long that.
You want me to read it?
What's that?
You want me to read it?
Yeah.
No person shall be held to answer for capital or otherwise infamous crimes, unless on a presentment of indictment or of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia, when in actual service in time of war or public danger. That piece, that times of war, public danger, that's been pushed off to the UCMJ, Uniform Code of Military Justice, right? And rightfully so, right? Because we're asking people to do two different things, right? But again, the beginning of this starts with, is the burden of proof on the accused or the accuser? Do I have to prove I'm not guilty, or do you have to prove I'm guilty, right? And that's the big thing from what went on in England. The burden of proof was on the accused to prove they weren't guilty, right? And that becomes a slippery slope. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, or be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. Those public forfeiture laws now go directly in conflict with that statement right there.
Okay.
Right? We're going to seize money and we're going to use it. And if we were wrong, you don't get your money back, right? Or something to that effect, right? But I think in past discussions, I think the big thing, and I know you want to talk about it, is the whole double jeopardy thing.
Yeah, double jeopardy one to me is interesting, because people are like, oh, because there was a movie about it with Ashley Judd. People need to really understand that double jeopardy is about I can be in the United States, and there's probably even multiple ways. And let's say if I'm possibly military and I'm doing something on a military base, not only when I get in a military court, but I could also possibly be in federal court maybe even in state court. And if I did it in a potentially on an embassy, maybe there's some international stuff that could go along. I mean, there are so many times as to which you could be, tried. So if the federal didn't get it, well, maybe one of the other ones would. It's the fact that the federal government or the state government or any of those jurisdictions, they can't try you twice, but they can go to one of the others. And then, of course, there's also civil. So you may have been not guilty in all criminal proceedings. This is what we saw in the O.J. Simpson trial. So they went after him civilly.
Right.
So understand that, a particular government may not come after you more than once for the same crime, but we have multiple governments in the United States.
Right. Well, it's funny you bring up the military because it is, I think, local authorities and the military themselves, and military towns in particular, play one against the other. And I think the big one is DUI.
Yeah.
In a couple of different reasons. One, in my lifetime in the military, the government and the military in particular has done an extremely good job to de-glamorize alcohol abuse. Does it say it doesn't happen? No, but it's not kegs of beer in the team room at the end of the week and things like that like it used to be, right? I'm not saying that it was, I'm telling you how it was. I'm not advocating for one position or another. So for a police officer, civilian police officer, to write up a DUI and then go through all that, that's a significant investment in time, right, for them. And I'll give you an example. A friend of mine was with a bunch of other friends of mine, and they were coming back from Tijuana in San Diego, going through Coronado. They went down there for the afternoon, had way too much to drink, came back. They're driving up 75, going towards the naval base in Coronado. About 200 yards shy of the front gate of the base, San Diego or Coronado police officer pulls him over, says to the driver, this has become within the community, it's a stuff of legends because just what he said to him. He's like, have you had anything to drink? He goes, yeah, only about 5 or 7. The police officer kind of looks at him and laughs after he gets over the fact this guy just admitted to having 5 to 7 cocktails. And it's 2 in the afternoon. And he said, where are you going? He's like, I'm just going to take it right there and I'm going to go in the base and then, go park my car on base. He's like, good luck with that. Right? Because there's an ID check there. It's not like you're just going to get to drive on and go about your way. And he was just saying, hey, I'm going to transfer the process of dealing with that DUI. Either way, he's going to get done. Right? That's the mindset. Either way, that guy's going to get done for DUI. I just don't want to have to deal with the paperwork and the months long going to court and being told I didn't know what I was talking about or anything else. Right? The poor kid on the front gate, it's 2 in the afternoon. He wasn't suspecting him of being drunk. It's not like it's 10, 11 o'clock at night when you come in and they're like, hey, what have you had to drink, right? Guy showed him his ID card, let him drive right on. Right? He beat the system, right?
That time,
right? Well, but again, this comes back to, do you think that police officer outside was doing the wrong thing? Because my buddy was endangering the public, right? Really, he was endangering the public. And I'm not throwing stones. I'm just saying that's the fact, right? And he said, I'm going to let somebody else handle that, right? And it didn't, he got away with it. That it didn't work out, right? But the other side of this, and this is where, when you start talking in particular about the ability to be tried by 2 different jurisdictions, is in the military, and I had gotten into this argument when I was on active duty, because you make the penalty, you make the penalty such that you encourage people to do the morally wrong thing. You encourage them to lie about what happened, right? And I'll give you an example. If and this is in the SEAL community, if I went out and I got pulled over for suspicion of DUI, right? The next day, my responsibility is to come to work and to tell them that I got pulled over and arrested for suspicion of DUI. That day, I lose all of my special pays until it's adjudicated, which can take up to a year, right? Sometimes, depending on it could take a year. You're talking in some cases $1,500 to $2,000 a month in special pays. So that guy went out and did something silly. So now his family is going to have to pay for it. And that's on the suspicion. That's not a conviction or anything. And at the end of that, even if he gets acquitted and nothing happens, he doesn't get that money back. All right? So what do guys do? They typically, you put them in a bad position. You're like, because doing what is like not following the policy and coming in, doing the wrong thing becomes right because the penalties are potentially less. If I don't tell anybody, and I'm going to have to tell somebody, because usually they'll tell their chief. Right? They're going to come in. I'm like, hey, this is what happened. We're like, how many people you told? Nobody. Great. Then that's the perfect amount that you just told now. Right. And hopefully the cycle works out so that they can take leave to go to court if they have to go to court. If they do get convicted at the end and they have a security clearance, they just need to go tell the special security officer they got a DUI. Right. And they've saved that. And I've gotten arguments with the command drug and alcohol prevention folks. So like, no, it's your moral responsibility. I go, you can't make telling the truth that before a conviction that bad, right? And what I think is the policy is like, hey, yes, you can't let people go running around and get DUIs, right? And I'm totally down with that. But at the same time, like, let the civilian process work, right? When a student's going through training, for example, if they get a DUI, they're automatically out of training. Why? Because we told them that was a rule, right? Because we're asking you during a very trying time of your life and to saying, I want to be this, to not do something stupid, right? Don't put me in a corner. Don't put me in a position where I can't defend you, right? And a lot of those, when you start talking about multiple jurisdictions as double jeopardy, it's the thing to punish somebody twice, right? And why do we want to do that, right? And a lot of it, what my personal opinion is, I've seen dudes that back in the day before it was a thing, they had 2 or 3 DUIs, and now they're on the moral high ground, right? And you just I want to go up and choke them. I'm like, wait a second, you know, if today's policies were in place, you wouldn't be an E6, let alone E9,
right?
Right? Because we got to hold the line. No, like. And that's the problem when, you know, it's certainly in the military is, you know, this grandiose vision of how tough it was when I was doing it, right? Back when I was, you know, kind of thing. It's like, no, it was just different, right? And we did glamorize alcohol abuse, right? To the point where the kind of the generation before me, and I was kind of the tail end of it. I mean, you have some hard pipe hitting drinkers every day of the week, and watching them just throw 6-packs in the passenger seat of their car and drive off after they'd been drinking. And if you try to say anything different, you're going to have to fight them. Right? How many times do you want to do that? Right? But that's a very limited case. And you understand that when you go into the military, that you defend democracy, you don't always get to practice it. Right? But I think it's a small price to pay because you're fully apprised of your responsibilities. Right? I think that's where the military in large measure, I think, has it right. Today in the world, and not just us, but everywhere around the world, everybody, I got rights. And you do. You absolutely do. And nobody's trying to take them away from you. We ask you to exercise some responsibility while you're having fun with your rights. Right? Whereas the military says, hey, here's the responsibility you have to get this right. Right? And I think in most cases, because the circumstances can be much different and more dire, in most cases that hits the nail on the head. And I don't know because I've not been in the military for quite a long time now, but I would like to talk to, you know, mid to senior leaders as to how that thought process works out with young folks today. Because I think in a lot of ways, when, you know, I'm using myself, when kids go out and they get in trouble and they're miscreants, big or small, it's because they're looking for a boundary. They don't understand left and right limits because they've never been given them, or they want attention for that, right? And that's really where I think you apply that to any of our rights, and you're doing it on a grandiose scale.
Yeah, and speaking of the grandiose scale, I mean, I think this last part of the 5th, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Yeah, it's kind of what's going on right now. When it comes to these, you know, quarantines, we're being deprived of life, liberty, and potential property. Right? I can't go out, and I mean, thankfully, I'm in the, you know, the type of career that is considered, you know, whatever you want to call it, essential. You know, but not only am I an essential worker, I also work in critical infrastructure and financial services. So I'm, you know, thankfully, you know, exempt from some of these things. But not everyone.
No.
And they're being deprived of life.
Well, you know, you have you don't have the right to life, life, liberty. You have the right to pursue, right? The pursuit of happiness, the pursuit of life, liberty and happiness. But as it states here, you can't be deprived of that without the due process of law, right? And that's where, again, to go back to our first point, that's where when people say enough's enough, why is it enough, right? It's enough because now they don't feel like they have due process anymore. They don't feel like they have a voice in their own destiny, right? And I think that's what freaks people out more than anything else, right? And it's like, wait a second, I don't respect that person to begin with. And that's, I heard somebody on the radio, and it was, it was a big left-right argument, right? One person on the extreme left, one person on the extreme right, and somebody in the middle trying to referee. And both of them, the one thing they agreed on is that part of the problem is we call our elected officials leaders, right? Instead of representatives.
Yeah, I was going to say they're a representative. They're not a leader,
right? And the guy that was on, I can't remember which one, but one of them was like, "Hey, that's because we just don't teach people. We don't do basic government very well in public schools anymore, right?" I don't, like my daughter's taking U.S. government.
Well, wait. I mean, because of what we call government. I mean, if propaganda is what we want, then the public schools are doing quite a good job.
Well, like I said, I don't even know if it's propaganda. I just think that you devalue the importance of kids understanding the mechanics of it.
Yeah, I was mainly saying that in jest because they typically what we're hearing from, at least what I'm hearing from a lot of other parents, is all we're doing is talking about BLM or this or that, and and I'm like, well, that's because it's relevant. It's going on today. That's not propaganda. It's, hey, you might be feeling this way, so because it's all over the media.
Well, I mean, you and I are both educators at heart, right? We're teachers at heart. We like helping people learn and think. And what's the thing? What's the easiest way to get somebody interested in something that might be considered dry? Make it relevant to their life as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Right. And I was just going to say, my daughter's, junior year, they all take U.S. government. And as it happens this year, it works out that during the leading up to the election and everything, they were talking about both houses of Congress, all the, not just physical structure, why one's 2 years, why one's 6 years, its relationship with the other two branches of government, but also all of the things that make the Electoral College relevant or not, right? And having that discussion, because people are like, well, what's the Electoral College? And so explaining how it was, why it happened. And so even my daughter came home, she's like, she goes, there's so much I've learned. And I've learned it because it was juxtaposed against what's happening on the news that afternoon. Right. And I think that's and to the best of my knowledge, from what she said, the teacher wasn't picking a side. It was explanatory. But he wasn't saying, hey, vote for this person, don't vote for that person, or do whatever. It's like, hey, here's how the system works and here's why. Right. And that to her and some of her classmates has been more valuable than anything. Right. Because now they, when they do get into the Constitution or like that, they do it from the, hey, do you think this is happening today? Do you think you fully enjoy this right today? Right? Or what did the founders mean by that? Right? Those are the discussions I like. Right? Because now people say, oh, one of the comedians, I can't remember, it's like, if Thomas Jefferson were to stand up today and be like, you guys didn't change it? In 240 years, you didn't change it? Well, we have 27 times, right? And where I think a lot of people they disconnect from the Constitution is we live in a society that wants things now, right? I don't like this, so I want it changed now, right? And it's been this where you look at Supreme Court justices in particular, and you look at somebody like Antonin Scalia in particular. He was the most recent in probably everybody's memory, where he confounded and was labeled an extreme conservative because his thing was like, look, my liberal friends on the court get mad at me, my conservative friends on the court get mad at me because once I find a nugget in the text of the Constitution that says I have to be guided this way. I'm guided solely by the text, right? And the new Comey Barrett, the new justice, she was a clerk for him, and she feels the same way. Now, I'm not arguing whether that's right or that's wrong, right? Instinctually, if that's exactly how they feel, right, truly, then that's the dispassionate, you know, when the lady up there is with the scales of justice, that's dispassionate, right? I think in today's world, we have a lot of folks that they don't want it to be dispassionate. I want to get into your feels, right? And it's got to be here, not here, right? And it's that old thing. It's like, hey, it's fine to let your heart guide you, but you need to take your brain along with it, right? And I said that is, I think, the fundamental place, because now case-made law has become so important to defending certain things, because case-made law can be done what? In a cycle of the legislature. Right. And it's less whim resistant is probably the way I'd like to say it. And I think a lot of people don't think like, hey, why is this so hard? Well, it was by design. Like if you read things that were written by Jefferson and Hamilton, it's like the whole purpose was to say, yes, there's a mechanism for change, and we understand that world events will necessitate change, but we don't want to make it so easy that you become a prisoner of the moment. I think when we start talking about fundamental changes to how we move forward as a nation, is do we have to do things and be prisoners of the moment? Right?
You know, and I think this is it was a good aspect of trying to disassociate yourself with whatever's going on, because that's what you want in a judge. Mm-hmm. And this is where I tell people who are very adamant on either pro-life or pro-choice. The reason why the Supreme Court has to make a decision is because a law was created that says you can't do something, and if it's a can't, is that in conflict with the Constitution? But right. If you write a law that says you can do something, then it's no longer against the Constitution because you're permitted to do this.
Well, actually, I'll give you an exemption. I'll give you an example. So if the state of, I don't know, pick any state, if the state of Iowa, their governor and the state legislature passes a rule that the state police can be quartered, or the National Guard can be quartered in people's homes, that's a can. That's a can that'll get challenged at the Supreme level. Right. It won't, like, immediately. Yeah. Like, and nobody, and it's one of the things, it's a really bizarre case, because nobody would ever, it's not like, wait a second, that's like, wait a second, don't we have an amendment against that? Right? Isn't that constitutionally thing? Abortion is the hot one, because other people say you have a constitutional right to an abortion. No. You have a legal right to an abortion that's been defended by the Constitution. Those are two different things.
Right. And that's kind of where I was going, because you have states and I personally would never condone someone getting an abortion. I would, but I'm not going to condemn them if they chose to do so either. I don't have to live with that. But for myself, I believe that, hey, that you don't know who you might, in the maybe they're not you. Like maybe there's not a TK Eppley that existed, because you've talked about your mom.
Well, no, I tell you, I'm adopted, right? And it's one of those things where when people ask me, are you against abortion? And I'm like, yes, right? And I've been out in public events speaking and stuff like that, and it came up, and you can watch people viscerally like retract, right, when you say that, right? And I mean, that was one lady, poor lady was rocking like she had autism almost, because it was, if I was on social media, she would have hit the block me button.
Yeah, sure.
She wouldn't have. And my question to the audience was, does anybody want to know why? Right. And finally, some guys goes, well, you said your kids go to Catholic school, so it must be a religious thing. I'm like, nope. And people are now everybody's back in the conversation while I'm speaking. And I'm like, no, I'm adopted. And if Roe v. Wade was passed in 62 instead of 72, I might not be here. Right. In some ways, it's completely selfish. Right. But, I also understand that right now there's a law in the books that says under these circumstances, a woman can go out and get an abortion. Right. And I'll stand up every day and defend their right to do it, because by due process, like how our government, how things are supposed to work, we agreed, and it was defended constitutionally, that they have that right. So let's go out and do that. Right? We can argue about like, oh, is it this many weeks? Is that, all the things that are in the news now, right? We can argue that, but you can't you can't disregard the fundamental right to go do it. And if you want to, you need to do it in the same process that they did to get the law passed to begin with, right? That becomes the arduous thing. So now I'm just going to stand up and yell and scream, right? And people will bring their own biases into that, right? But at the end of it, I don't have to agree with it to defend it, because it was they did the right thing. It was structured the right way. And there's a lot of laws like that. Like if you go down to South Florida, they have the 1 foot dry rule, which Cuban Americans came here, they became citizens, and then they said, how do we do this? And they got a law passed that says if, when people are emigrating and they get in their, and it's heart-wrenching to watch, right? When people show up and they're in all matters of floatable craft, right, is the best way, whether it's 10 milk cartons together or a small boat or whatever, right? I mean, it's like from a humanity standpoint, it's heart-wrenching to watch. But if they get on there and they're dry, there's a process to allow them to start the citizenship thing. And anytime that stuff is going on, the police have their role to play as they're out there in the surf, they're trying to stop it. When somebody gets through, the Cuban Americans that are citizens that are activists and part of this, they pull them aside and said, hey, you have to behave in this way because this is what the law says, right? Do I have to disagree with, does anybody have to agree with that law? Nope. But you know what? You have to abide by it because they did what we want you to do. You become a citizen, you work in your community, you vote. And you use the process, the legal given process that we have to change the country, and you changed it. Good for you, right? I mean, I'm happy that people do that. It's the shouting and shouting and shouting and saying, hey, this is wrong. Go get the majority of people to agree with it, and we'll make it a law. Until then, you're just shouting at the moon because we have the founding documents here, right? And if you don't like the founding documents, I can't help you, right? Because for those of us that think it's one of my favorite statements, America is the worst country on earth until you go to another one, right? And that's the thing that keeps that fire burning in me, especially with the Constitution, is it's so elegantly simple that it's almost why I think a lot of people don't want to come back to it, right? Because when they're like, and this, and then I got this, and 3 days later my leg hurt, whatever. Yeah, but the Constitution says this. Yeah, but don't worry about that. No, it's really simple, right? Yeah. I mean, and I think, like you said, I think you're right. The Fifth Amendment is probably of the first 10 amendments, it's the most verbose.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, that's, the rest of them are just like, they're further guaranteed. Like, if you look at 5, 6, 7, 8, they're all further defense, or 6, 7, and 8, they're all further defenses of the Fifth.
Yeah.
Right. You can't accuse yourself of anything. They define what a civil trial looks like. They say, you can't have excessive fines and stuff like that. And then the 9th Amendment or the 8th Amendment is unusual punishment.
Yeah. And I think when we get into the excessive fines, one of the amendments, later, I think that's what you're going to wind up seeing a lot of businesses going back after the state governments for taking away liquor licenses and things of that nature, because it's going to be considered excessive.
Right.
And they're going to, and guess what? I think the states are going to lose.
I do. And I think that, I'd like to see, I don't know if I'll be alive to see it, but through the long lens of history that, you could go one way or another. All of these governors that are really acting capriciously like this, are they going to be seen as tyrants through the long lens of history? Right? I don't know. Right? To me, it's interesting. Like to say, hey, 50 years from now, how do people look back on this? Right? Because 50 years ago is the early 60s. Right? When you say it out loud, it doesn't sound like that long ago, does it?
No, it doesn't. And I got to say, I mean, I am adamantly opposed to what Cuomo is doing there in New York. He's, when you get off a plane and he's got the National Guard basically forcing you, to
show us your papers.
Right, right, the show me your papers aspect. He's that to me is just abhorrent behavior to be utilizing military people to do something of that nature. I think it's horrible. I think what he's doing in the rest of the state, I think New York is going to wind up, and a lot of these states are going to wind up in a very hurting time because no state is permitted to operate negative. Only the federal government has the right to be able to essentially go out and have debt.
Right.
States can't.
I mean, most states do. Right. I mean, or quite a few, I should say.
Right, and that's why the federal government has to always constantly be bailing them out.
Right.
And that's a big part of this aspect of the spend dollars, so to speak, of the CARES Act or whatever you want to call it. Heroes, which I can't stand the way these names because it makes it almost to a point where if you vote against it, you're voting against heroes. No, they come up with a crazy acronym for that, but that's so this way the Fed will go and bail the states out.
That's marketing, right?
Yeah,
it's marketing, more than anything else.
Because no one wants to talk about, like in New York, when Cuomo decided to go below the standard for how many hospital beds needed to be per, I don't remember if it was 100 people or 1,000, people. He went below that standard. Why? Because, budget. He cut, he chooses where that money goes, so to speak, in the state, in the state government. Yeah. He proposes and they went along with it. Well, he's the one that was advocating for the the removal of hospital beds. I mean, this was pre-COVID.
But you look at New York City in particular, is having an exodus.
Oh yeah.
And I'm talking, before it was hedge funds, right? It was really wealthy companies and really wealthy billionaires going, okay, I'm saying uncle, and I'm moving to, I know 2 or 3 hedge funds moving to Florida, kind of these people are moving to states. They're moving their businesses to states that have a greater tax benefit, right? The one that got me the other day was NASDAQ is in talks with the governor of Texas to move the NASDAQ to Texas.
Good.
Well, but think about that, right? What's New York always been?
Yep, the financial capital of the world, basically.
Yeah, and you're saying, nope, we're going to move it Dallas, Austin, somewhere, move it down to Texas, right? And
hey, but don't you go turn Texas blue. I don't want to see that.
No, well, that's but I mean, you look at other venture funds, like think about how many of the venture / PE firms are leaving California right now.
They have to. You can't. I mean,
I understand that, but you put in place a mechanism that is saying, hey, we're gonna just. And I mean, New York is beautiful a city as it is. What's it going to be 10 years from now, right? If people act on everything they say they're going to act, even if half their businesses leave, right? They're not. I mean, what's the rent market going to look like?
Hey, and in 3 or 4 more years, it's going to be very cheap because I think that's going to continue to plummet. But I think New York, very well could wind up being a museum. Hey, this was once.
This is what happened. Yeah.
Right. When you continuously put more and more laws and regulations on things, people just aren't going to eventually. This is what I get. All of those that want to make fun of the flyover states, where do you think people are going to right now from the coasts? They're because there's land, there's things they can go back to some freedoms, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I think I don't believe in the amount of those that are going to be on the same side of fear mongering, but I mean rather the opposite side of fear mongering, but still fear mongering. Country's not in bad shape by any stretch of the imagination. We are very resilient with our ideas, and that's really what the United States is good with in terms of is coming up with new ideas on how to do something.
But you look throughout the history of the U.S. We started out as a great agrarian nation. Then people migrated to the cities. We became a great industrial nation. Then that great industrial nation, people moved out of the Rust Belt down south as information technology, and we gravitated towards areas where the next generation of innovation was, which was in tech. And now, whether it's COVID influenced or not, innovation centers and things of the future are moving to different places.
Yeah, you're no longer going to have to be on the coasts in order to be in an innovative organization.
No. And I think now, you know, hey, you've got to be at a physical place to do work. That was on its way to changing to begin with because of just basic technology that everybody expects. But it was moved along because, you know, a lot of the 55 and older guys are like, hey, you need to show up, right? CEOs and things. Well, are you paying me for attendance or are you paying me for results?
Last time I checked, I get paid for results.
Right. But that's, you know, and there are certain businesses where you have to show, hey, if you're going to work in a factory and they're going to make stuff, yes, you got to be there. But the bulk of, you know, most people, even a lot of those jobs, if you're not on the factory floor, do the accountants have to be in the building? Right? You look at REI, the outdoor company, they just built some massively cool, greened up building for their company headquarters out west, and they've just gotten rid of the building. They're gonna, you know, they're like, right, we can keep a distributed workforce. In fact, it kind of works better for us now. Yeah. Right? And that to me is what's the innovation? It's not, the innovation isn't Zoom being better or Google Meet being better or something like that. How is work going to change? And how are we as Americans going to be more efficient at what we're going to do? And where can I do it? And that's what it says, hey, I'm tired of living in San Francisco because the rent's too high, taxes are too high, you know, whatever drives people to move from wherever they live. I'm going to move to Oklahoma, right? Or I'm going to move somewhere in the South, right? Why did the auto industry move to the South in the 80s? Right? When Toyota, Hyundai, BMW, everybody started coming to the US to put factories in. Why did they gravitate towards the South?
No unions.
Right to work states. Right? All right. And that's, I mean, but I'll get in this, union people are going to at me in this. When the unions were first started in the turn of the 20th century, they were essential to get in place the workplace provisions that we take as basic necessity now.
Yeah, a break room, you know, getting
40-hour work week, no child labor, you know, decent
health insurance,
health, you know, a safe workplace more than anything else. So that, like, you know, like showing up in your factory is not a killing ground, right? Proper sprinkler systems. What was that? It was a garment factory that burnt down. All the doors turned inwards instead of outwards, right? So it was all of these little nuanced things that, you know, like we take for granted when you start a business, you move into a building. Hey, does it have sprinkler systems? What are we doing for fire prevention? Right? It used to be sprinkler systems. Now, how do we manage the electrical system and stuff like that? Back at the turn of the 20th century, unions were essential to do that. There are multiple federal agencies that do that today. Tell me why I need a union.
And not just that,
right?
You know, we all have, in some way, you know, at least the ability to have a marketable skill.
Yes.
And because we have a marketable skill, whether or not that is you're a welder, you're an electrician, you're a technology professional, you know, you're an accountant, it's a profession that you have a skill and some capability. So with that, I get to negotiate what I believe to be fair, and I don't have to work for that company.
Well, you get somebody to tell you what fair market value is, right? I could walk into a company and say I want $500,000, and they're going to be like, "Well, actually, we're going to pay you $250,000."
I'll be like, "Why am I taking a pay cut?" No, just
right. But you know what I mean? It's like you can go in and ask for whatever you want, but part of that social contract between you and your employer is that you understand the market you're in, and if for no other reason, you don't want to identify yourself as either ignorant or uninformed. Right. And I think that's, you know, I just said, it's one of the great things about the Navy, right? You kind of take pay out of it. Right. You know, it's like, so if you're unhappy with what you're doing, the max you have to be doing it is 3 years. Right. At the end, fill out a chit and go somewhere else. Go do something else. The Navy, in large portion, unless you're in some super critical skill, isn't going to stop you from changing. Yeah. Right. Go find out, you know, go find your density, as they used to say, right? Your destiny. Right. But I think, you know, when you start talking now about young folks and going to college is, you know, a lot of times the price of college drives kids into saying, oh, I've got to get in and out in 4 years. Well, what happens if they go there and they're like, hey, I thought I wanted to major in this, but really, I don't want to be doing anything like this. I don't even want to be approaching this for the rest of my natural days. I want to do something else. Well, now the cost all of a sudden becomes either prohibitive or it becomes a big blocker into somebody changing what they're going to do. That, I think, I think that's changing a little bit when you get places like Google and Facebook and everybody saying, hey, you don't need to have a college degree to work here. You need to have knowledge. And how do you acquire that knowledge? And Elon Musk is big on saying, we want smart people. I don't necessarily think they have to have a college degree, right? And how is that going to change, right? Because, you look at the federal bureaucracy, that's a super overeducated workforce, right? And they're overeducated for the purpose of getting pay bumps in some cases.
Absolutely true. I don't look at someone and say, just because I have degrees that if they don't, they shouldn't be a part of the club. I could care less.
Right.
You're either the type of person I want or not. And you can either do, you could have.
A lifelong learner has nothing to do with being in a building. Is that
right?
Right.
Anyone could have taken the knowledge that I gained from an MBA and have accumulated all of that on their own.
Right.
Essentially the reason why you go possibly do a degree anywhere is because of the structured format and it's accelerated, right? I know I have a method that is proven and you're paying that amount of money to get a framework and an acceleration so you don't have to go out and try and figure it out.
And a network.
Right, of course, the network.
And that's, I think when you start talking, especially in the terms of a top tier MBA, whether it's Ivy League or public Ivies like Michigan and some of the others, that network of people you have access to upon graduation, is huge. And it's people can like it or not like it. It's just a real thing.
It is.
Right.
It is. And there was someone put online not too long ago, which I really, really love this aspect. And I'll have to go back and find it and I'll put it out there at some point again. She went out and found all of these free programs that are offered by universities and things like that would essentially get you a computer science degree minus all of the English and humanities. Still required math, but she says, okay, if you're going to do this, you need this kind of math class. Go to this university. They offer this free class right here online and this, so basically she put together, you want a computer science degree? Here you go. And here's like everything there. And I'm like, now that's, a great idea because in, technology, there's plenty of stuff out there that's free. That's really, really good.
Right.
And people can learn it and, get to it, get after it. You can do a lot of this stuff with a Chromebook, which almost every school, the public school system in the United States seems to have a Chromebook at this point.
I tell you what, I like my Chromebook.
I love Chromebooks. I absolutely do. I'll be, looking to try to move my organization more and more towards, Google Desktop as a service as well, because then for those things that I still have a thick client that requires it, boom, go into it and then get out because everything else is web-based.
I like it just because, especially on this Pixelbook, because I can download Linux. I got a Linux distro on there now, and it's like you can go, and especially if you're going to opt into doing like, if you want to get like the Google Cloud SDK and you want to start thinking in terms of that, everything's at your fingertips on a relatively inexpensive device that has, you're not worried about patching. It's like I'm a big believer in them. Actually, I've seen them, from both my kids having them in school, but certainly from an enterprise perspective, especially now, like when everybody's remote, why do I need to invest in heavy lift computers?
No reason to. And this is what's funny when you take a look at any reviews of like laptops. Like I came across my Google News feed today. It was the Dell's XPS whatever versus the MacBook Air whatever. And I'm like, well, where's the Pixelbook in this? Because guess what? The Pixelbook's got all the same hardware.
Yep.
It'll blow both of those things away.
Right, so you're asking it to do.
Yeah.
Right. And you set it up correctly, you can put all your mobile apps on there too.
Yep.
If that's your gig.
Yep. Absolutely.
Right. Like I said, I like the Pixelbook Go. I have not messed around with, but I like the usability of my Pixel. I like it. It's a good tool for me.
Yeah. just got this in, testing it out. The new Samsung Galaxy Chromebook.
Do they have all of like the Galaxy, like on their Galaxy phones, they have that Samsung overlay of skin of all their crap on there?
No, I haven't. There's nothing. Basically, it looks just like any other Chromebook.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I don't have all of this other, like with the Galaxy phones. It's their flavor. It looks just like when I opened up my Pixelbook, opened up the Acer one, because trying to get from a company standpoint, the aspect of, well, everyone had iPads. Well, the iPads that they've got, one, you can't really do a whole lot with an iPad. It's just,
yeah,
it's not very good. It's great if you're doing an app-based thing, but good luck trying to really consume anything on it. But even with that, the iPads that they have are one more version, and they're not going to be able to accept any more security updates. It's also the version they have isn't compatible with like the Apple Pen, so I can't take notes, things of that nature. So right. So as I'm looking to transition, I'm looking for the right Chromebook that I can give out to the rest of the executives that because we didn't have a history of remote access until COVID. So
right.
Now I can start deploying this. It's easier for me to manage. It's easier for me to do updates. And then whenever I need desktop, I can put them into a virtual desktop environment, and they have their Windows, thick client needs being there as well. But for the most part, everything else we have is web-based. So,
right.
Have
you looked at the Lenovo Chromebook Duet?
Not yet. No.
It's their tablet. It's a 10.1-inch tablet. It's $250.
Oh,
64 gigs of RAM. It's a kick. It's funny. It's one of those things that gets really highly rated. I don't have one. It gets really well rated. It comes with the keyboard and the case and everything.
Nice. Bringing it up. Let's see.
Yeah.
Yeah. $300 at Best Buy if you want the 128 gig drive.
But here's the thing. It's a Chromebook. Why do I need 128 gigs?
You don't.
Right?
It's got 8 cores.
I know, but that's what I'm saying. It's $249. I like duh. Like
it's got an 8-core processor.
No, hence the reason I was asking you, because I was like,
that's insane.
I know. I know. It almost like, my power nerd me wants to just hop my car and go to Best Buy and buy one. This, because at $250, I just want to see what the hubbub's all about.
Yeah, I just gotta check to see. So really the only difference is, so in the Samsung one, I've got an actual Intel i5 processor, and 8 gigs of RAM, but it's also, 8 cores. And it's just it's crazy. And really you're just paying for the RAM. And that's the reason why the biggest difference in the price.
No, I know that, but like I said, you're talking an 8-core processor, $250. I mean, if it meets your needs as a Chrome device, like why do I need a Pixelbook, right? If most of those guys are just they're gonna shell into their Windows desktop, like here you go, have that.
The only reason you would need the Pixelbook at that point is because you also happen to want to be doing Linux on it. With that $250 Chromebook, you're probably not doing Linux. It's
right. How many of those people are doing that? Like if you look at your total population, right? You're looking at total population of users. One person needs a $900 Chromebook. The rest of them need
a $250
one.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Exactly right. So, all right, my friend. Well, it was another good show. We got a little bit of Constitution in there.
Got a little bit of everything.
Everything. So, I know I won't be able to promote this one until maybe January
2035. When do the Kennedy papers get released again?
Who knows? All right, my friend. Take care. Have a great rest of your day.
Have a great week, everyone.